I stood in the middle of the living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. My suitcase sat by my feet, half-zipped, its handle slicked beneath my trembling fingers. Across the room, my mother-in-law leaned against the doorway with that familiar smirk, the kind of smile people wear when they've already written the ending to your story. "You're a guest here, and your time is up," she said. Her voice was soft, deliberate, and cruelly calm. The words hit harder than I expected. A guest. That's what she called me. A guest in the apartment I paid $4,800 a month for. The rent that left my account every 30 days, the furniture I had picked, the curtains I had ironed, the art on the wall I'd chosen after saving for months. All of it mine. But to her, I was nothing more than an unwelcome visitor who had overstayed her welcome. For a moment, I just stared at her. The morning light cut through the blinds, slashing across her face in thin gold lines. She stood tall, arms folded, lips pursed like she'd been waiting years for this exact moment. And maybe she had. I felt the weight of the room pressing down on me, the scent of her cheap lavender perfume, the faint clinking of her bracelets as she shifted her arms, the air thick with triumph. Everything about her screamed satisfaction, as if finally, after months of quiet hostility and silent battles, she'd won. I gripped the suitcase handle tighter, not because I planned to leave, but because I needed something to ground me. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. My jaw locked to stop my voice from breaking. Because if I said what I wanted to, it would come out as a scream. She mistook my silence for surrender. "You know," she went on, stepping further into the room, "I try to make this work. I really did. But some people just don't fit in, no matter how much space you give them." Space. That word almost made me laugh. Space was the one thing she had taken from me since the moment she arrived. My kitchen, my living room, my peace, all swallowed by her presence, her rules, her need to control everything around her. I didn't answer. I just watched her, the way one might watch a stranger in the street who's talking too loudly. There was a strange calmness building inside me, like the stillness right before a storm breaks. She took my silence as permission to keep talking. "Ethan agrees with me," she said with a small, victorious shrug. "It's better for everyone this way." Ethan, my husband, the man who had promised me partnership, loyalty, understanding. The man who, as it turned out, preferred keeping peace over keeping promises. I could almost picture him sitting at his desk at work, oblivious or pretending to be. Maybe he'd sighed when she told him her plan. Maybe he nodded along just to end the conversation. Maybe, just maybe, he'd actually agreed. Linda, she always made sure her words carried weight. She knew exactly how to strike, where to twist the knife so it hurt the most. "You'll be happier somewhere else," she added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You've always seemed uncomfortable here. Like this life isn't really yours." Uncomfortable. That was her word for the months of quiet war she'd waged against me. The passive-aggressive comments, the rearranged furniture, the constant invasion of boundaries. She had turned my home into a chessboard, every move designed to push me one square closer to the edge. And now, she thought she'd checkmate me. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You talked to Ethan?" Her smirk deepened. "We both think it's for the best." There it was, the confirmation of betrayal I'd been bracing for. I felt the anger rise like heat from the floor, curling up my spine, but I didn't show it. I refused to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I looked around the room, really looked. The framed photos on the wall, the velvet couch I'd bought on sale after weeks of searching, the throw pillows she'd swapped out for her own ugly embroidered ones. Every inch of this space told a story. My story, rewritten and stolen by her arrogance. For months, I'd told myself to keep the peace, to wait for Ethan to take a stand, to hope she'd find somewhere else to go. I had swallowed my pride one bitter spoonful at a time. But this was different. This wasn't just control. This was eviction. I bent down and zipped my suitcase the rest of the way, the sound sharp in the silence. Her smile widened, assuming I'd finally accepted defeat. "Good," she said softly. "You're doing the right thing." But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that every quiet moment of that scene was me reclaiming something she'd stolen, my power. Because while she thought I was packing to leave, I was already plotting the moment she'd lose everything she thought she'd won. I straightened up, hands steady now. The trembling was gone. The fear was gone. Only clarity remained. If that's how it is, I said evenly, meeting her gaze. She lifted her chin, smug. That's exactly how it is. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut, the kind that fills the air before a storm hits. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind her, counting down the seconds to her own undoing. I reached for my jacket, draped it over my arm, and rolled the suitcase toward the door. Every step felt deliberate, heavy, final. She followed behind me, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence she thought she'd written. At the door, I paused. For a second, I considered telling her the truth, that the lease had my name on it, that every square foot she stood in was paid for by me. But no, that revelation deserved a larger audience. It deserved timing. So instead, I just turned back to her, smiling faintly. You should enjoy this place while you can, I said. Her brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged lightly. You'll find out. Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see the crack beneath her confidence. Then I turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway, letting it close behind me with a soft click. The sound echoed in my chest like the end of a long, bitter song. Behind that door, she probably stood victorious, already planning how to redecorate her apartment. But she had no idea that the ground beneath her was already crumbling, that the walls she thought belonged to her were about to disappear entirely. And as I walked away, the anger I'd carried for months began to cool into something sharper, quieter, far more dangerous than rage. It was resolve, because what Linda didn't know was that this was not my ending. It was the beginning of hers. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. I have missed you all. Click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. 6 months before that day, before the suitcase, before the smirk, before everything fell apart, Ethan had come home with a look that told me he was about to ask for something I wouldn't like. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, rocking on his heels like a teenager rehearsing bad news. So, he began, stretching out the word, "Mom's been having a rough time lately." That was the kind of sentence you knew never ended well. I lowered my coffee cup. "What kind of rough time?" "She's still dealing with the divorce," he said. "The house sold faster than she expected. She just needs somewhere to stay until she figures things out." I stared at him for a beat, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You mean with us?" He nodded, all earnest brown eyes and soft voice. "Just for a little while. A month or two, tops." I wanted to believe him. I really did. Ethan was kind, patient, and hopelessly optimistic, the type of man who thought every problem could be solved with understanding. But what he didn't understand was that some people don't want peace, they want power. I sighed, pressing my thumb against the rim of my mug. "Ethan, your mom and I, we're different." "I don't think." "She's not that bad," he interrupted quickly. "You just haven't spent enough time together. Once she's here, you'll see. She's just particular about things." Particular. That was his word for her. Mine was controlling. Still, I agreed, against my better judgment, against every small warning that buzzed in the back of my mind like a mosquito you can't swat away. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was the right thing to do. Linda arrived on a sunny afternoon with 2 suitcases, a box of framed photos, and the kind of smile that was more performance than sincerity. "Oh, thank you, sweetheart," she said as she hugged Ethan. Her eyes flicked past him to me. "You too, dear. I promise I won't be any trouble." The way she said it, I already knew she would be. The first week was tolerable. She made dinner a few times, mostly to help out, though somehow it always ended with her criticizing the cookware or the spice rack. "You know," she said once, stirring the pot on the stove, "a real kitchen needs good knives. These are too dull." I bit my tongue. She complimented the apartment, too, though never without adding something like, "Oh, this place has potential. It just needs a woman's touch." I was the woman. Ethan didn't seem to notice. He was just happy his mother and wife were getting along. He'd walk in, see us smiling politely at each other, and beam like a proud referee watching two boxers shake hands before the first round. But the smile faded once the woman's touch started taking shape. It began small, little invasions disguised as improvements. I came home from work one day to find the throw pillows on the couch rearranged. She'd swapped the soft, neutral ones I love for floral covers she'd brought from her old house. Just brightening up the space, she said cheerfully when I asked about it. The next day, the coffee mugs in the cabinet had been moved. My favorite mug, the one I used every morning, was now on the top shelf, out of reach. I noticed her watching me stretch for it the next morning. She smiled, sipping her tea. Maybe it's time you start using the bigger one. It holds more. I laughed it off, but the laughter felt brittle in my throat. Within a week, the changes escalated. The living room furniture was rearranged for better flow. The rug was rolled up and replaced with one she found in storage. She started labeling drawers in the kitchen, plates, utensils, pantry, like she was organizing her own home. It wasn't until she began hosting her friends for tea, using my dining table without asking, that the truth sank in. She didn't see herself as a guest. She saw herself as the new mistress of the house. When I complained to Ethan, he rubbed his forehead and sighed. "She's just settling in," he said. "She's probably nervous, that's all. You know how she is." Yes, I did. That was the problem. It was around that time the rules began. The first one came casually over dinner. "No cooking after 8, she said between bites. "It makes the apartment smell like grease when I'm trying to sleep." I blinked. "Excuse me. It's just a simple rule," she added with a smile. "For everyone's comfort." Everyone's comfort, meaning hers. A few days later, another rule appeared. No shoes in the hallway. Then another. No TV after she went to bed. I remember the night that one was declared. Ethan and I had just settled on the couch to watch a movie. Halfway through, she emerged from the hallway in her robe, clutching a glass of water like a weapon. "Could you turn it down?" she asked sweetly. "I can't sleep with all the noise." Ethan reached for the remote before I could respond. "Sure, Mom." The screen went dark. I sat there in the silence, feeling like a stranger in my own home. From then on, I moved carefully, like a tenant living under the watchful eye of a landlord who hated her. Every sound felt too loud, every step too heavy. I even caught myself apologizing once for leaving a mug in the sink overnight. Her control seeped into everything. One morning, I woke up to find a framed photo from our wedding missing from the console table. I found it later in the guest room, face down in a drawer. When I asked about it, she said, "Oh, I thought it looked cluttered out there." Cluttered. That was her word for us. Ethan didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. Every time I tried to bring it up, he'd say, "She's family. She just needs time." But it wasn't time she needed, it was territory. And she was taking it, one small rule, one quiet invasion at a time. I started noticing other things, too. How she'd stand in the kitchen, talking on the phone, calling it Ethan's place. How she'd make subtle digs at me that only I seemed to catch. "Some people don't know how to make a home feel cozy," she'd tell her friends. "They're all work, no warmth." I'd stand there, chopping vegetables, pretending not to hear. Inside, though, something was changing. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was calculation. Because I realized the only way to deal with someone like Linda wasn't to fight her directly. It was to let her believe she'd already won. By the third month, she'd stopped asking before she changed things. The house had become a reflection of her tastes, her routines, her rules. And still, Ethan didn't see it. He was too busy working, too eager to keep the peace. "It's just temporary," he'd say like a prayer. "She'll move out soon." But soon turned into someday, and someday turned into never. By the 6th month, Linda had carved her name into every corner of my life. My home no longer felt like mine. My silence had become her permission slip, and she wore her victory like perfume, invisible, but impossible to ignore. It was in the way she smiled at me across the dinner table, the way she paused at the doorway to my room as if checking her territory, the way she said, "Good night," like it was a reminder of who truly ran this household. And still I waited, because I knew, even then, that the day would come when she would push too far, when her need for control would become her downfall. And when that day came, I wouldn't just take back my home. I'd take back everything. The real insult wasn't what Linda did. It was what Ethan didn't. It wasn't the way she rearranged the furniture or hovered over me like a self-appointed house inspector. No, it was the silence. The kind that cuts deeper than words. The kind that says, I see what's happening, but I won't interfere. The first time she called at Ethan's place, I was standing in the kitchen, scrubbing the dishes. She was on the phone with one of her friends, her voice loud enough for the whole apartment to hear. Yes, it's Ethan's place, she said proudly. He's such a good son. Took me in when I needed help. I froze, my hand still in the soapy water. She said it like she believed it, like the words were carved in stone. Ethan's place. Not ours, not mine and Ethan's, just his. When she hung up, I waited for Ethan to say something. He was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone. You heard that, right? I asked. He looked up, confused. Heard what? She called at your place. He shrugged. She probably didn't mean it like that. But she did. She always did. And he knew it. That was the moment the silence between us started to shift. Not loud, not violent, just colder. The kind of quiet that builds slowly, like frost creeping up a window pane. After that, she said all the time. To her friends, to the neighbors, even to delivery guys. Oh, just bring it upstairs to Ethan's apartment, she'd chirp. He's the one who takes care of everything around here. I wanted to scream, but what was the point? Every time I tried to correct her, she'd tilt her head, smile sweetly, and say, Oh, did I say that wrong? My mistake, dear. Her words were sharp sugar, sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. And Ethan? He stayed quiet. Every single time. The more he let her talk, the bolder she became. It started with my closet. I came home one afternoon to find my clothes folded in piles on the bed, the smaller guest room bed. The main closet, the one I used, was half empty. I found Linda inside, hanging her dresses and arranging her shoes like she was moving into a boutique. Linda, what are you doing? I asked, my voice tight. Oh, she said, turning casually, I just thought it made more sense this way. I need the extra space, and your things fit better in the smaller closet. Fit better. Like my life was just clutter she needed to rearrange. I glanced toward the doorway, hoping Ethan would walk in, see this madness, and say something. Anything. But when he did come home later and I told him, he just sighed. Babe, she's only staying for a little while. It's not worth fighting over. But it was, because it wasn't about clothes or space. It was about erasure, slow, deliberate erasure. Next, it was my desk. That corner by the window was my favorite spot. It had soft afternoon light, and when I worked there, the world outside felt peaceful. But one day, I came home and found it gone, replaced by a round tea table covered in lace. Linda was in the living room, pouring herself a cup of tea like nothing had happened. Where's my desk? I asked. She looked up innocently. Oh, that old thing? I moved it into the storage room. The living room feels more open this way. The storage room doesn't even have a window, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She smiled. Well, you work on a computer, right? You don't need sunlight for that. That was the first time I had to step into the hallway just to breathe. Each move she made was so small, so subtle, that it barely seemed worth confronting on its own. But together, they built something bigger, a pattern, a strategy, a quiet invasion disguised as housekeeping. She didn't shout, didn't argue. She just moved things, shifted them, reordered the world until I barely recognized it. Even dinner became a performance. She'd sit across from Ethan, laughing, telling stories about when he was little, stories that always ended with her emphasizing how much she'd done for him. Then she'd glance at me and say things like, You know, Ethan's always been responsible. Even as a boy, he took care of everyone. Every compliment to him was a reminder of my place, lower, temporary, replaceable. One night, she looked straight at me and said, I'm just so glad Ethan has a home he can be proud of. He's done so well. The words slid across the table like poison, and Ethan smiled, completely missing the sting. Thanks, Mom. I didn't speak for the rest of dinner. That was when I realized the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. She was rewriting the story of this home, line by line, with Ethan as the hero and me as the footnote. And he was letting her. Every time I folded, she expanded. Every time I stayed silent, she grew louder. So, I decided to start documenting. It began one night after another small argument that Ethan had brushed off as overreacting. I sat in bed with a notebook and a pen, my hands still shaking. On the first page, I wrote, Day 1. She moved my desk, so I didn't need sunlight. It felt ridiculous at first, like a diary for someone else's bad behavior. But once I started, I couldn't stop. Every comment, every manipulation, every small theft of space. Day 3. She told me my work isn't real work because I sit at a computer. Day 6. She called it Ethan's place again, in front of me. Day 12. She moved my clothes, said they fit better in the smaller room. Day 19. She scolded me for ordering takeout, said I should learn to cook more like her. The notebook became my sanity, my proof, my private rebellion. I kept it hidden in the drawer beside my bed, beneath an old sweater. She never found it, though sometimes I caught her in our room, pretending to tidy up. I would come home, and the air would smell faintly of her perfume. Drawers slightly ajar. The faintest misplacement of my things. My lotion moved, my perfume cap missing, a hair tie gone. She was marking her presence in every corner. Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't want to face what that meant. The truth was simple. The home I'd built was slipping away, inch by inch, and I was watching it happen. But I wasn't just watching. I was recording. And with every page, I was reclaiming something. Not my space, not yet, but my power. Because what Linda didn't realize was that she wasn't just moving furniture. She was building a story, one I would later use against her. At night, I'd reread my notes, tracing every word with a quiet sort of satisfaction. Her arrogance made her sloppy. Her confidence made her blind. She thought she was winning, but I was keeping score. And when the time came, when the balance tipped, those pages, every insult, every act of trespass, would become the foundation of something she'd never see coming. Her downfall. If someone kept taking credit for what you built, your home, your effort, your peace, would you stay silent like Ethan, or would you fight back like me? Tell me in the comments. At what point would you say enough? It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where sunlight spills softly through the blinds and you think, just for a moment, that peace might last. My best friend, Maya, had promised to stop by. We hadn't seen each other in weeks, and she was bringing pastries from our favorite cafe, warm, flaky croissants that smelled like comfort. When I opened the door, she grinned, holding a white paper bag aloft. Truce offering, she said. Chocolate and almond. I laughed, a sound that felt foreign in my own home lately. You're a lifesaver. Come in. We moved to the kitchen, spreading out the pastries, pouring coffee, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Maya was mid-story about a disastrous first date when I heard it, the faint, deliberate shuffle of footsteps behind us. Then the voice. Cold, clip commanding. Guests need to ask me for permission before coming here. Maya stopped mid-bite. I turned slowly. Linda stood in the doorway, wearing her robe like a queen surveying her subjects. Her hair was perfectly set, her expression carefully neutral, the kind of practice calm that made every word sting sharper. Excuse me? I asked, my voice too soft at first. You heard me, she said. It's rude to have people over without asking me first. I blinked, stunned by the audacity of it. Why? I asked slowly. Would she need your permission? Her lips curled, a small, cruel smile spreading across her face. Because this is my home, she said simply. And you're lucky Ethan lets you live here at all. The words hit harder than I expected. The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Maya looked between us, her brow furrowed in confusion. Wait, what? She asked softly, as if maybe she'd misheard. But I hadn't. Linda meant every word. She stood there with her arms folded, chin slightly lifted, soaking in the silence she'd created. She was enjoying it, the power, the public humiliation, the way the air around her bent with tension. My throat felt tight. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw every truth I'd been holding back straight into her smug face. Your home? I wanted to say. The one I pay for? The The one you've been living in rent-free? But instead, I looked toward Ethan. He was sitting on the couch, his phone in hand, completely absorbed in his screen. The blue light reflected in his eyes, as if the scene unfolding a few feet away didn't exist. "Are you hearing this?" I asked, my voice trembling not with fear, but disbelief. He glanced up, then back down at his phone. "Let's not make this a big deal," he muttered. "She just wants to feel included." Included. That word cracked something inside me. I stared at him, the man who'd promised partnership, loyalty, love, and realized he had become a ghost in my marriage. A spectator, watching as his mother rewrote the rules of my life, page by page, without ever lifting a finger to stop her. I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was colder than that, quieter, like a flame being covered, not extinguished. Maya looked at me, uncertain, silently asking if she should leave. I gave her a small nod. "It's fine," I said tightly, though it was anything but. She gathered her things, casting a wary glance at Linda, and mumbled, "Thanks for the coffee." Linda didn't even acknowledge her as she left. She just stood there, satisfied, like she'd successfully defended her kingdom. The moment the door closed, the silence between us grew thick. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You really think this is your home?" Linda tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, don't take it so personally, dear. You know how sensitive you can be." There it was, her favorite weapon. Not insults, not yelling, but gaslighting wrapped in politeness. I smiled faintly, though my chest burned. "You're right," I said softly. "Maybe I'm sensitive." She gave a smug little nod, thinking she'd won again, and walked off toward her room. But I stayed there for a long moment, staring at the door she'd disappear behind. Every breath I took felt heavier, slower. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The humiliation wasn't the kind that explodes. It was the kind that seeps in, quiet and steady, until it becomes resolve. That night, I sat alone on the edge of my bed, staring at the notebook in my drawer, the one where I had recorded every move, every insult, every manipulation. I flipped it open and wrote another entry. Day 37. She humiliated me in front of my best friend. Called this her home. Said I'm lucky Ethan lets me stay. Ethan said nothing. The words looked too calm on the page for how furious I felt inside. But as I stared at them, something strange happened. The anger sharpened into clarity. I realized I wasn't documenting any more to vent. I was collecting evidence, building a story, a strategy, because people like Linda don't just take what you give them, they take what you let them. And I had been letting her for far too long. I closed the notebook and ran my fingers over its worn cover. Let her believe she's winning, I whispered to myself. That night, when Linda passed me in the hallway, she smirked, a small, victorious twitch of her lips. I smiled back, not because she'd won, but because I finally understood how the story would end. And she wouldn't see it coming. If someone humiliated you in your own home and your partner stood by in silence, would you swallow your pride to keep the peace, or would you fight to reclaim your dignity? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were me that day? It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that starts out so ordinary you never suspect it's the one that will change everything. The air was heavy with the smell of rain when I walked through the front door, a grocery bag in one hand, my keys in the other. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but purposeful, staged, waiting. Then I saw them. Boxes. Neat, labeled, stacked like a moving company had just left. My jacket folded on top. My shoes lined up beside them like obedient soldiers. Even my laptop bag rested neatly at the edge, zipped and ready. For a moment, my brain refused to connect the dots. Then I saw her. Linda stood by the door, her arms crossed, a satisfied smile painted on her face. She looked like a queen overseeing an eviction. "Good," she said. "You're home." I set the grocery bag on the floor slowly, keeping my voice even. "What's this?" She didn't hesitate. "Ethan and I talked. We agreed, it's time for you to leave." The words dropped between us like a final verdict. I stared at her, waiting for a hint of hesitation, a flicker of guilt, anything human. But her smile only widened, smug and practiced. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, We agree. Yes, she said, emphasizing the word like it was a weapon. Ethan thinks it's better for everyone. The tension in this house isn't healthy. I looked around, taking in the boxes, the precision of it all, the way she'd gone through my life piece by piece and packed it up like trash to be taken out. The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. Where is he? I asked finally. At work, she said lightly, as if she were commenting on the weather. He left it to me to make sure you go. There's a faint hum in my ears, a mix of shock, disbelief, and something else, something steadier. Calm. I should have been furious. Should have screamed. But instead, a strange quiet settled over me. I looked at her, really looked, and realized I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel cornered. I felt done. All right, I said. My voice came out level, almost too calm. For a brief moment, I saw it, confusion flickering across her face. She hadn't expected it to be this easy. Good, she said after a beat, recovering her smirk. I'm glad you're being reasonable. She stepped aside to make room for me, like a landlord dismissing a tenant. I reached for the handle of my suitcase. Don't worry, I said softly. I won't make this a scene. Her smile grew, triumphant. She thought she'd won, that I was the broken one. If only she knew. Because in that moment, as I wheeled my suitcase out of the apartment I paid for, I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving to prepare the end of her little empire. Outside, the rain had started. Thin, misty, unrelenting. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, the sound of my suitcase wheels clicking softly against the floor of the hallway. I could almost hear her inside, humming with self-satisfaction, imagining herself victorious. Let her think that. By the time I reached the street, the plan had already begun to form. Clean, cold, deliberate. She wanted me gone? Fine. She'd get her wish. But when I was finished, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose the very ground beneath her feet. That night, I checked into a modest hotel a few blocks away. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, quiet walls, and a lock that kept her out of my life. I set my suitcase down by the bed, exhaled, and finally let the weight of the day settle on my chest. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer absurdity of being kicked out of my own home. But anger wasn't what filled me. It was clarity, because while Linda thought she was pushing me out, she was actually handing me the key to her downfall. I reached for my phone, scrolling to the landlord's number, the one I'd memorized after months of handling the rent payments myself. When the receptionist answered, her voice was polite, neutral. Good evening, Harborview Apartments. How can I help you? I straightened on the bed. I said calm and steady. I gave my name. I'm calling about Unit 15B. I'd like to end my lease early. There was a pause on the other end. Papers shuffled. You're the sole leaseholder, correct? Yes, I said, feeling that word land like a quiet victory. Of course, she replied. We'll just need 30 days written notice and final month's payment to close it out. That's fine, I said. I'll send the notice tonight. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark hotel window. The city lights flickered outside, faint and distant. For months, I'd felt powerless, trapped between a spineless husband and a woman who treated my life like her playground. But not anymore. I opened my laptop and began to type the email. It was short, professional, and painfully polite. Subject: Notice of Lease Termination, Unit 15B. Dear Management, this is formal notice that I will be vacating Unit 15B at the end of the 30-day period, effective date. Final payment will be delivered in person tomorrow morning. Best regards, my name. I read it twice before hitting send. No drama, no emotion, just facts. 10 minutes later, the confirmation arrived. The lease would end exactly 30 days from now. The apartment Linda thought she ruled, the one she strutted through like a queen, would soon no longer exist in her world. I imagined her face when the landlord showed up for inspection, the confusion, the panic, the realization. That was the satisfaction I was saving for. Before bed, I opened my notebook, the one where I'd recorded every insult, every manipulation, and added a final entry for the night. Day 64. She packed my things and told me to leave. She thinks this is victory. It's not. It's the setup. The next morning, I walked to the bank, withdrew the final month's rent in cash, and dropped it off at the landlord's office in person. No electronic trail. No forwarded emails. No way for Linda to discover what was coming. Everything about my plan was simple, quiet, invisible, effective. Because revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it only needs paperwork. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I felt lighter than I had in months. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect. And in 30 days, the walls Linda claimed as hers would close in, without me ever lifting my voice. Let her enjoy her tea parties, her borrowed luxury, her illusion of control. The eviction notice she feared most was already signed. She just didn't know whose hand had written it. If someone forced you out of your own home, would you walk away quietly and plan your revenge like I did? Or would you confront them right there on the spot? Tell me in the comments. Would you choose patience or payback? 2 weeks passed before I went back. By then, I had already moved into my new apartment, small, bright, and quiet. The kind of space where silence finally meant peace instead of punishment. I hadn't planned to return at all, but some mail had been delivered to the old address. And curiosity has a way of leading you straight back to the places you've already outgrown. So, that Saturday afternoon, I found myself walking up the steps of the building that used to be mine. The moment I stepped onto the floor, I heard laughter, loud, animated, the kind that fills every corner of a room. The closer I got, the stronger the sound became. There was music, the clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation. Then I smelled it. Perfume, red wine, something baking in the oven. Linda's party. I paused outside the door for a second, my hand on the knob, the ghost of old emotions swirling beneath my calm exterior. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave. But another part, the part that had waited patiently for this moment, whispered, "Go on. See for yourself." I opened the door. It was like stepping into a performance. The living room was glowing with soft light. People stood in small clusters, wine glasses in hand, laughing at something Linda had just said. The woman herself was in the center of it all, her hair perfectly curled, a glass of champagne catching the light as she gestured dramatically. "Oh, she was saying, "Ethan and I just love this place. It's our little sanctuary. I tell him all the time, I don't know how he ever lived anywhere else." I almost laughed. Our sanctuary. She hadn't noticed me yet. My mail, a few envelopes, and a small package, sat neatly on the console table near the door. I picked them up quietly, almost invisible in the crowd. But then someone saw me. A woman in a red dress turned, her smile friendly and curious. "Oh, you must be Linda's daughter-in-law," she said brightly. "I've heard so much about you." Something about her phrasing, Linda's daughter-in-law, as if that somehow defined me, made me smile. "Something like that," I replied. "I just came by to grab my mail." Linda turned at the sound of my voice. For the briefest second, her smile faltered, then quickly snapped back into place, tight and nervous. "Oh, you're here," she said, her tone falsely cheerful. "Everyone, this is—" I didn't let her finish. "Oh, don't mind me," I said casually, flipping through the envelopes. "I won't be long." Then, without looking up, I added in the same calm, conversational tone you'd use to comment on the weather. "By the way, the lease ends next week. So if you see movers around, don't be alarmed." The room fell silent. It was instant, like someone had cut the sound with a knife. The music played softly in the background, but no one was listening anymore. Every eye turned to me. "What do you mean the lease ends?" asked the woman in red, confusion knitting her brows. I looked up at her and smiled. "Exactly what it sounds like," I said. "I ended it. The lease is in my name. New tenants move in next week." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, all the heads turned toward Linda. Her face, God, I wish I could have taken a picture, was pale beneath her makeup, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape hatch. That's not true," she stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "This is Ethan's place. He wouldn't—" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "It's not Ethan's place," I said softly, but every syllable landed like a hammer. "It's mine. It always was. My name is the only one on the lease." Gasps, whispered murmurs. You could feel the air shifting, the weight of realization settling over the room like a storm cloud. "Wait," one of the guests said under their breath. "She's been paying the rent this whole time." Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." The whispers rippled through the group, faster than fire on dry leaves. Faces that had been smiling seconds ago now turned curious, judgmental, uncomfortable. Linda's hand trembled around her wine glass. She tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked halfway through. "That's ridiculous," she said weakly. "You must be mistaken." I tilted my head, watching her unravel in real time. "Am I?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. I took a step closer, keeping my voice calm, almost kind. "I gave my notice 2 weeks ago. The landlord already processed it. They'll be here for the final inspection soon. You might want to start packing." It was the word packing that did it. Her eyes widened, and I saw the truth hit her all at once. The walls of her illusion collapsing in front of an audience she'd carefully curated. The silence that followed was heavy and exquisite. I let it linger, just long enough for every guest to see the cracks in her confidence, to feel the humiliation ripple through her perfect little performance. Then I smiled. "Anyway," I said lightly, slipping my mail under my arm, "enjoy your evening." And with that, I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the faint buzz of whispering rise again, voices overlapping, wine glasses clinking nervously. I didn't need to look back to imagine what was happening. I could see it clearly in my mind. Linda's frozen smile, her desperate attempts to laugh it off, the questions from her friends piling up faster than she could answer them. By the time I reached the elevator, I heard one last voice echo faintly down the hall, a guest's uncertain tone. "So, she's been living in her apartment this whole time?" I pressed the button, and the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. As they closed behind me, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, calm, steady, victorious. Not angry, not even smug, just free. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't needed to argue. The truth had done the work for me. Downstairs, the air was cool and fresh. The city buzzed quietly outside, alive and indifferent. I walked out into the street with my mail tucked under my arm and the lightest heart I'd had in months. The apartment above me, the one Linda had called hers, was no longer my burden. Soon it wouldn't be hers either. And for once, the silence I left behind wasn't mine to carry. If you had one perfect chance to expose someone who stole credit for your hard work, would you do it quietly like I did? Or would you make sure the whole world knew the truth? Tell me in the comments. Would you walk away in silence or stay to watch their downfall? The morning after the party, the apartment that once felt like a battlefield finally met its reckoning. At precisely 9 o'clock, the landlord arrived, clipboard in hand, a polite smile on his face, completely unaware that he was about to become part of the final act of a story months in the making. Linda answered the door, still dressed in one of her silk robes, her hair hastily pinned up. From what I later heard, she had tried to play hostess, offering him coffee, assuming he was there for some routine maintenance visit. But then came the sentence that tore down the last of her illusions. "We're here for the final inspection before the new tenants move in." I wasn't there, but I could imagine every second of it. The way her smile froze, the way her hand clutched the doorframe for balance, the dawning horror on her face as the words sank in. Final inspection. New tenants. Move in. In that instant, she must have realized the truth. She wasn't the homeowner, the matriarch, or even the tenant. She was a squatter in a life she tried to steal. The apartment she had bragged about, the one she claimed as Ethan's place, was gone, legally, officially, and irreversibly. I didn't need to see it to know what followed. The frantic calls to Ethan, the panic in her voice, the frantic shuffle of excuses and blame. She'd spent months building a house of cards, and now, with one letter of lease termination, it all came crashing down. My phone started ringing before noon. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. Then again. I ignored the first 2 calls. On the third, curiosity got the better of me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he snapped the moment I answered. His voice was sharp, laced with confusion and anger. The tone of a man realizing the foundation he'd been standing on wasn't his to begin with. Tell you what, I said calmly, leaning back on the couch in my new apartment. That you ended the lease. The landlord just came by. Mom's freaking out the apartments. I cut him off gently. Ask your mother, I said. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, you might finally understand what it feels like when someone takes something that doesn't belong to them and acts like they own it. He tried to protest, to backtrack, to sound reasonable. You blindsided us. I laughed softly. No, Ethan. I just stopped playing by your rules. And I hung up. That was the last real conversation we ever had. A week later, they were both gone, Linda and her son, packed up and moved out before the new tenants arrived. From what mutual friends told me later, the move was a mess. Linda cried, shouted, and blamed everyone but herself. Ethan tried to calm her, but even he looked lost, a man who'd spent too long pretending not to see the truth until it finally hit him square in the face. When I went back one last time to drop off the keys, the apartment was almost unrecognizable. Empty walls, dust on the floor, the faint echo of voices that no longer mattered. It was strange, standing there in the quiet, realizing how much energy I had wasted trying to hold together a place that had been rotting from the inside. But for the first time, that emptiness didn't feel sad. It felt clean, a blank page. My new place was smaller, but it felt bigger in all the ways that mattered. No passive-aggressive rules taped to the fridge. No rearranged furniture. No forced politeness. Just silence, soft, gentle, earned. I decorated it slowly, picked out curtains I actually liked, set up my desk by the window so the light fell just right on my morning coffee. I filled the kitchen with my favorite things, the mugs Linda had once hidden on the top shelf, the throw pillow she'd called boring, the rug she'd rolled up because it didn't match the aesthetic. Every choice was mine, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, then months. Ethan stopped calling. Linda didn't dare. I heard through a friend that she'd found a cramped one-bedroom outside the city, a place with peeling paint and outdated carpet. She complained about the long bus rides, the noise, the lack of space. It wasn't revenge that made me smile when I heard it. It was balance. The world has a way of correcting itself. One afternoon, months later, I was curled up on the couch scrolling through my phone when a Facebook notification popped up. You have a memory to look back on. I tapped it without thinking. It was a photo, a shot I'd taken the day Linda told me to leave. The edge of the hallway, my suitcase by the door, sunlight slanting through the blinds. I could almost smell the tension of that day, the way my hands had trembled as I gripped the handle. Back then, I posted it with a caption that now made me laugh. When someone thinks they can evict you from the home you pay for, let them try. I read it twice. The first time I'd written those words, they were defiance, a small rebellion whispered through clenched teeth. But now, reading them again, they felt different. They felt like closure. Because I had let her try, and she failed. The smile that spread across my face wasn't tight or bitter like before. It was real. The kind of smile that comes when you finally stop fighting ghosts and start living again. I looked around my new living room, the sunlight spilling across the floor, the quiet hum of peace filling the air, and realized something simple but powerful. I hadn't just escaped her. I'd outgrown her. Freedom wasn't just about leaving the place she'd poisoned. It was about reclaiming the version of myself she had tried to bury, the woman who knew her worth, her strength, her power. Linda lost her illusion of control. Ethan lost the safety of silence. But I gained everything that mattered. And as I set my phone down and looked out the window, I whispered the words I hadn't been able to say that day. Good riddance. Because I didn't just walk away. I walked away on my own terms. And sometimes, that's the sweetest victory of all. If someone tried to take credit for your hard work, your home, or your peace, would you quietly let karma handle it? Or would you take control and write your own ending? Tell me in the comments. Would you have walked away or made them watch you win? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your opinion. Thank you for watching this story to the end. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Click on the image showing on your screen right now, too. Watch the next one.